Hello everyone, today we're going to be building some Jurassic World. The latest wave of Jurassic World sets, based off of the new movie, features some pretty cool builds, but they're all missing a very important dinosaur. I am still holding out hope that we might see it later down the line, but with Jurassic World Rebirth coming out tomorrow, I thought it was the perfect time to build the D-Rex. I chose to build my model based off of this toy with the varying color schemes I thought would look really nice. A key characteristic of the D-Rex is its large round forehead that almost looks like a beluga whale. I found these round curved elements that I thought would represent it pretty well. At the top here I tried to start blending in this darker pattern. Here we add the forehead to the rest of the head I built. I also included slopes above the teeth to make it look like the forehead is protruding a little more. This is where I started building the eyes. I found these two small round pieces captured the red pupil in the middle of the eye pretty well. Here I add them into the rest of the head. That plate at the back serves two purposes: to make it flush with the rest of the model and to cover up the inside, which is not the same color. Here we start on the lower jaw. I found these 1x2 slope pieces fit in pretty well at the front there. It's also in white to start the underbelly of the rest of the dinosaur. It is at this point that we connect the lower jaw to the rest of the head. They're connected at the back with a clip to allow the mouth to open and close. Now the head is complete, and I think it's a pretty good start for our D-Rex. Here we start on the first section of the torso. This is a look on the inside with all these bracket pieces to connect the sides. I also continued the pattern up on the top. We also include a ball joint to connect the head to this part later on. Here I sped up the process of filling in the sides here with these tiles and plates. I added some cheese slope elements at the top to blend it into the pattern. Here I messed up and placed it on the wrong area and it broke off a couple times, but then eventually I fixed it. And now we finish up the rest of this section and it's time to connect the head. The connection of the head to the torso ended up being pretty smooth. It's even able to tilt back and forth a little bit. You can see once we add the head, the mouth is not able to open up very much. I'm not too worried about this since this is more of a display model. You can see the pattern on the top of each section blends well together at the top as well. I also included 3 clips at the back, but one of them ended up not being used. Now it's time to start on the third section of the body, but one of the pieces fell off, and that problem will come back later. I won't show any of the process of building this section since we saw all of it with the first part. The only difference here is this angle that I achieved using two 2x4 angled plate pieces. I brought in the rest of the model so we could connect the rest of the torso. The ball joints fit in well, and you can see those angled plates fit in very nicely. This angle helps create a bit of a hunched over look that you can see in most of the trailers. The pattern from the first two also continues over nicely. The next part of this build is the tail. It was at this point I noticed I was slowly running out of tan pieces. I was considering ordering a duplicate of one of these 2 T-Rex tails since their colors matched what I was building. It would save a lot of time, but I also decided that I didn't want to use these because I wanted to make it completely brick built. So with this idea scrapped, it was time to start on the brick built tail. An issue I came across was trying to cover up these ball joint pieces. I was left with a gap at the bottom. I came up with a technique of using some bricks connected to some of the tiles on the sides that would easily cover it up and you wouldn't be able to tell there's a gap. I even remembered here that I used this exact same technique with the body. In between the 2 torso sections there was a large gap that needed some covering. Now that all of the tail sections had been completed, it was time to connect them all together. Each section slowly gets a lot thinner to make it slowly taper off towards a point. You can see here, even though I've covered up a lot of the ball joint pieces, it still has a good amount of motion. The tail is able to bend down and up a lot, despite having bricks above the ball joints. The only section that isn't able to move like that is the top, but it can still swivel. Now we're ready to connect the tail to the rest of the body. I ended up being a lot happier that I didn't use the T-Rex tail since it looks a lot more accurate. Here's what it looks like so far. Here you can see the white at the bottom all blends together really nicely. The dark pattern at the top there did eventually fade away into the tail. This was the most challenging part by far. It was time to build the legs, and I needed them to look similar to these T-Rex legs. The only part I needed was this exact angle. I ended up putting them on the model to see if they were the right size, and they were not by a long shot. The legs that I would need to build would have to be a lot bigger. After experimenting with different build techniques for a while, I eventually got inspired by the T-Rex breakout set. The largest part of the leg here is all one piece, so I don't have to build multiple sections. Of course, the biggest challenge was making sure I had enough pieces for 2 of these. With the joints to connect it to the rest of the body, I found this dark tan element that I thought would blend with our color scheme pretty well. Most of the ones I had came in black, which I did not think would blend very nicely. The next step was creating the feet. The challenge I faced here was making all of the toes face in a different direction, like you can see on this T-Rex foot here. Eventually I came up with a solution to this problem. I had one center module here, with some clips in these transparent pieces. This allows me to barely bend the other toes out. So with 2 of those in place, I was able to take some sloped brick elements and attach them to create the rest of the toes. It's a very finicky connection, but it was the best that I could come up with the parts I had. But either way, I think the result here looks really good. And once again, I had to create 2 of those. And here, once again, I sped up the process of connecting them all together. I had to have this foot detached, connected onto a ball joint so they could swivel on their own and help put the dinosaur in a stance at the very end. With everything now attached, the 2 back legs were complete and ready to be added to the model. I was ready to move on to the front arms, where I had to reference this clip. The D-Rex is able to pick this guy up and lift him off of the ground, which means his hands have more range of mobility, which I would have to take into account when making the hands. Here I started on the front arms. I ended up using some friction pins to help keep these side panels in place so they didn't move too much. With this section now completed, I was ready to move on to the forearms. But first I had to make sure I had 2 of these parts before moving on. This is the point where the arms on the toy that I was referencing earlier starts to transition into a brown color. I made these forearms a lot longer and thinner than the earlier piece. Since there's not too much to say about those, it's time to move on to the hands, where I used an angled 1x2 clip. You can see here that the fingers have a lot of mobility like I was aiming for. Now all I had to do was attach a ball joint piece to the end of this plate, and it was ready to be connected to the rest of the arms. But for the second to last time, I had to make sure I had 2 of these before moving forward. Once again, I sped up the footage of assembling all the arm pieces together. One issue with these small ball joint pieces I wasn't able to get around was the fact that it could slide around on the table a little too easily, so the model isn't very sturdy when he's standing up. You can also see I used the same dark tan pieces on the joints. And here we have our 2 completed arms. Now before finally attaching everything, we had these 2 tiny little arms at the front, since he has 4 arms. They look very similar to T-Rex arms. You can see a lot of 1x1 tiles since I was running out of 1x2 tiles at this point. And now I remove these dinosaurs since it's time to combine everything together. This was a really challenging build and took me about 7 hours to complete, but it wasn't done just yet since I would run into another problem that I came across earlier in this video. I was grabbing that center part when I was adding the front arms when I would find out that there was a very loose connection in the center. And it was right here that my fingers slipped and broke a part of the model. It was back at this clip where I put the thing on the table and this angled plate ended up falling down. I shrugged this moment off, hoping that it wouldn't come back later, but it did, and now I have to come back and fix it. Thankfully, it wasn't very hard to fix this issue. It only took 2 bricks. So here I pulled out this plate. The only thing holding it in was that 1x6 tile, so these 2 bricks are going to add some internal support to both sides. And now we are almost ready to move on. I added this in and covered it back up with our top pattern. You can see it is now structurally sound and we shouldn't come across this problem again. And now we're finally ready to put these last 2 little arms back on. I left 2 ball joints right at the front behind the head there so I could connect them in. Although these 2 little arms aren't very hard to build and are pretty small, I think they add a lot to the final look. And now our build is finally complete. Taking a look at the model, I am really happy with how this turned out. I think it looks very similar to the reference I was going off of. The overall look of it is exactly what I was going for, and it looks amazing. Now going back to that scene where he grabs up the guy stuck in the cage with him, I decided to build a little minifigure to represent that scene. It was a pretty easy build, so I thought, why not add him in? I thought this astronaut helmet piece represented the suits that they were wearing pretty well. With this figure now completed, I can say that this model is done. I'm happy I went with the toy as a reference instead of some of the other pictures. I wouldn't like if it was just a solid gray dinosaur, since most of the pictures online depict it as a light or dark gray color. The lighter and more vibrant color scheme really helps it stand out compared to all of the other LEGO dinosaurs. One thing I'm hoping it achieved is its imposing stance when you look at it. You can see those front arms help it look really wide, which really captures that look. And now the final test I want to see is how big it is compared to other molded dinosaurs. I'll be comparing it to some of the larger ones like this T-Rex. I'll line it up at the nose just so we can get an accurate comparison of what they look like side by side. It ends up being much larger than the T-Rex and the Indominus Rex, and just barely bigger than the Giganotosaurus. With the goal of building the D-Rex complete, that is the end of this video. I thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you guys again soon. Bye!